We're doing great. All right. So, Rabbi Berenbaum doesn't know this, but I was looking at what to teach today because I I knew that I was going to be here, and then I realized the date. I wasn't really thinking what date it was going to be, and I realized that this was the day before Rabbi Berenbaum and Rabbi Dorf are being honored at AJU tomorrow, and I will be there. I blessedly do not have to say or do anything, but they still deserve all the praise that I would give them if I had been asked to speak, which I am not complaining that I wasn't. Um, and so I decided, instead of talking about Parshat Bamidbar, that we would actually take a dive into what it means to honor our teachers from our tradition. And I was thinking of how to connect it to Parshat Bamidbar, which we're not going to see any Bamidbar texts on here. Most of them are Pirkei Avot or Mishnah Torah. But this idea that Bamidbar, first of all, Midbar, the word Midbar is this place that is uncharted territory, right? It's not the desert, it's not the sea, it's not a garden, right? It's unknown territory that hasn't yet been traversed, and it's also kind of boundless in the way in which it's described in the Torah. And I think, as a teacher myself, I think that Bamidbar is actually what it's like to teach students. You are taking them through a midbar. You are taking them through uncharted territory for them and giving them sights to see along the way and paths to take along the way, and hopefully making it a meaningful journey from start to finish. And so, though we're not going to read any of Bamidbar today, I do think that this is apropos of what Midbar is, of what Bamidbar, this recapitulation of our story, is for our Torah, which is how do we hit back on all of the best hits of our story, and recognize that that was because we had really great leaders, really great teachers who showed us, look over here, see over here, recognize that you're a people over here, and then we're able to become teachers ourselves. So that's the kavanah that I'll give, alluding to Bamidbar being the parsha this week. But again, this isn't going to be a text study in the parsha of Bamidbar itself. Okay, Marshall, can I ask you to help me just pass these out? There should be enough one for everybody. I don't honestly remember how many copies I made, but I think we'll be okay. We're going to start on the Abraham Joshua Heschel side. There are not page numbers because I'm notoriously known for not putting page numbers. So why change that? Why change that brand, right? Deb said that now I'm an influencer, so why change my brand? Okay. So Abraham Joshua Heschel, who I very rarely say this, but I'll say this in the context of honoring our teachers. I'm actually related to, by marriage, to Rabbi Joshua Heschel and Abraham Joshua Heschel, and that's something that I didn't know the man, and I'm not related to him by blood, and so I don't nothing that he did I get in my DNA. But there is something to be said for having yichus to a rabbi and to a teacher for whom you then look up to their teachings, and how you yourself can be a teacher and someone who teaches Torah. So I'll just share that in the context of this teaching. He says, everything depends on the person who stands in front of the classroom. The teacher is not an automatic fountain from which the intellectual beverages may be obtained. The teacher is either a witness or a stranger. To guide a pupil into the promised land, the teacher must have been there themselves. When asking themselves, do I stand for what I teach? Do I believe what I say? The teacher must be able to answer in the affirmative. What we need more than anything else is not textbooks, you've all seen this line before, but text people. It is the personality of the teacher, which is the text that the pupils read, the text that they will never forget. Any comments or thoughts on this? This is probably a text that people have seen before, or at least the quotable one-liner that I mentioned as I was reading it. Any thoughts on this? Yeah, Irv agrees and believes that this is the way for teachers to be effective. I will say, not to embarrass him, but Rabbi Berenbaum was my aunt's teacher, and she said that his class was the only class that she remembered from that time of her life of learning. And it was because of this, right? It was because there was elements of Michael Berenbaum in the teaching, not just the text that was being taught. And I think that's a really important way of being a teacher and of also being a leader. If we just lead or we just teach by way of the text that is in front of us without giving any context to how it's impactful to us, there's really, first of all, no point in teaching it. And second of all, there's nothing that a student is going to remember based off of that teaching because okay, why does it matter? Just because it was written on page 256 of whatever textbook, if it doesn't matter to the teacher and it can't be made relevant to the student, what is it going to matter in order for us to be able to pass it down or to keep it as knowledge that's important to us? So, when we have teachers, it's important that they say, I actually don't believe this, or this is my theology, or this is the way that this speaks to me now versus when I wrote it. I just heard a story recently that Rabbi Aaron Levin shared that a teacher of his wrote a book. Do you know Aaron? Wrote a book about theology, and that when he went to teach it, he every year he would say, okay, erase on page 256 this line right here, rip out this page, because I wrote this book about my theology and no longer is that my theology, which just shows that our own texts, whether we are writing them or teaching them, can also change with us. And I think that's what Rabbi Heschel is saying here, that we need to grow with the text both as the teacher and as the student. Thoughts, comments, criticisms? Feel free to also embarrass Rabbi Berenbaum. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. For sure. Right. Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I think that the teacher, first of all, in college, it's the greatest opportunity to be able to do that because when you're in middle school and high school, most of the time you just have to take the classes that you're being told to take. And when you are in college and above, you're really able to decide, oh, I know that this teacher is going to teach to my teaching style or to my learning style, excuse me, or I know this teacher is really great at teaching this thing about, but I know that I'm going to learn something because they're really great at it. And I think the same goes for, and we're going to see this text in just a moment, the same goes for that phrase of oselecha rav uknelecha chaver, right? You're probably not going to make for yourself a rabbi who is teaching or believing or aspiring to text or study that you actually don't feel connected to. When Rabbi Singer Franks and I were in rabbinical school, we had these things called concentrations. They've gotten rid of them. I forget what they're called now, but a lot of the time, people were choosing concentrations based off of the teachers that they enjoyed learning with, never thinking that Chassidut or Tanakh or Halacha were going to be the topics necessarily that they were interested in, but the teacher made that topic come alive, and therefore they now had a master's in a topic that their teacher really enjoyed. Yeah, or
I did that, and I actually remember teachers that changed me from being a failed whatever I would have
sure.
been to working as a history major,
Yeah, yeah,
which I
yeah.
was planning on doing.
Yeah. And again, like we all can be teachers, right? I'm not just talking about people with masters in education. We're all teaching, right? Whether we have children, whether we are tutoring B'nai Mitzvah students, right? We're all teachers no matter what our classroom is. And again, it's that passion that we evoke in anything that we are teaching, whether it's to a child before they go to bed and the book that we choose to read to them, or while we're standing in front of a classroom and having to do algebra, what does that how are we making that interesting to them because it's interesting to us? Okay, let's go. Oh, yes, Marshall.
I think I speak for myself and also for Michael, since we're contemporaries, that we both were very much influenced by one teacher, Rabbi Richard Rubenstein,
Mm,
who in 1960s, early 1960s, wrote a book out after Auschwitz. And that was the time of a movement called the Death of God movement,
mm-hmm,
which was primarily Protestant theologians.
mm-hmm,
And Richard Rubenstein was a Jewish Death of God theologian.
mm,
And his influence has been a major influence on my own
Hmm.
theology, as well as it has on Michael's. And Rubenstein lived a very productive life. He was still writing into his early 90s, right? And never stopped, never looked back.
Great, great. Thank you for bringing Richard Rubenstein's name to this as well. Okay, so the Rambam, who himself was a lot of things, and one of them was teacher. I'm just going to read it in the English so that we can all understand it. But the beginning in the Hebrew is Ketzad melamdim. How should we be learning? How should learning happen, right? And the translation is a little bit different. How should a class be taught? Which is not actually what it says. The teacher sits at the head of the table, and the pupils surround the teacher like a wreath, so that all can see and hear the teacher. Now, what is that referring to? It's referring to, like, imagine the sanctuary, right? It's referring to a teacher in the center and the students all around, exactly the opposite of how we are sitting right now, or how we would be if we were in Pilchal, right? Not frontal whatsoever, but with the students actually surrounding the teacher. The teacher must not sit on a chair while the pupils sit on the ground. Either they all sit on the floor or they all occupy chairs. Originally, it's funny that it doesn't say anything about standing, right? But either they're all on the same level seated above, or they're all on the ground. Originally, the teacher used to sit while the pupils were standing. Ever since the time preceding the destruction of the Second Temple, it has been a general custom to teach pupils in the fashion they are seated. So what is this telling us, other than chairs versus no chairs? What is this telling us?
Teacher has to be on the same level,
Yeah.
physically on the same level so there's a connection with the student.
Great. The teacher has to be on the same level, right? We're leveling the playing field, quite literally. We're making sure that this is so nice. Like all of a sudden I have a spotlight. That we need to make sure that the teachers and the students feel like they're coming at this material from the same literal level, right? That you are not one above or below, but rather you're all coming at it together. Yes, Rabbi Singer Franks.
I have a favorite Rabbi Dr. story.
Great. How did you?
Favorite Michael story.
This is a favorite Rabbi Dr. Michael Berenbaum story, and he wants us to call him Michael. Okay.
So this is when Michael first came to the Shabbat Foundation.
Uh-huh.
And we were situated on the Universal back lot, and it relates to the story of being on the same level.
Mm.
I was assigned to Michael to teach him what we were doing in the cataloging department. He sat right there. I did not know him. I did not know of his work. I did not know of his legacy or his educational pedigree. He sat right next to me, and I taught him the fundamentals of regular chad, right? And I said, okay, go ahead and try it. So he listened to 5 minutes of testimony, and he applied keywords to the segment of testimony, and he said, so how did I do? And I said, nope. And I thought to myself, okay, so we're gonna, and it was followed by this trip across the back lot in a golf cart where he was so willing to learn from this fisher whose knowledge was narrow and very specific to a certain process, but and was not interested in revealing to me, like, you don't know who you're talking to, right? And from that, a marvelous friendship sprang forth and blossomed. And I'm very grateful to him for not slapping me down.
Well, and I think that there's something very powerful when a teacher can put aside that they are a teacher, not in that classroom, right? Or in your case, in that space, right? That you became the teacher, right? And that Michael did not have any false humility of needing to be the teacher in that space, because in that space he was the student. And I think for a lot of people who are second career anythings, though in my experience, that was rabbis, that was something that took a lot of practice. That people who had been out in the world, professionals in their own right, to then come back into the classroom and now be the student and not in front of the proverbial classroom, And you know that you are a good teacher when you can also be a great student, because you are able to be humble and say, there are things that I don't know. And that to me is actually one of the most important aspects of it, of finding a mentor and a teacher, is when the teacher can say, I'm not actually sure, but my job as your educator is to do the research to figure it out and come back to you and continue to teach you more. And my greatest teachers are exactly those people who are not afraid of saying that. And it seems like in that way, Rabbi Dr. Michael Berenbaum, who wants to be called Michael in his home, was exactly the same way. So great. That Rabbi Dr. Michael Berenbaum, who wants to be called Michael. Yeah, exactly. Formerly known as Michael. Yeah. Yeah, Rebecca, go ahead.
I think it's really nice when it says how the students all can see and know
Yes.
the teacher.
Yeah.
It really emphasizes the need to see,
Yeah.
how the teacher is expressing himself or herself.
Yeah, great.
Just as much, and it also kind of implies that the teacher may be see
Sure.
too.
Sure. Yeah, and again, there's that leveled playing field, right? That there's something to be said for you being able to see the students, because that's important for classroom management, but also the students be able to see you, because the way that you teach or the way that you express yourself is also an important part of how you're teaching. It's an important thing to also learn. And also, and you did not say this, but I'm going to push it one step further, accessibility is really important in classrooms, right? Especially in an era where we have the resources to allow everyone access to education. Accessibility is important, and differentiation is even more important, to make sure that not only literally can one be seen, but also, are you seeing that student's needs? Are you seeing that which is going to make them a successful student as a teacher, and then playing to those needs that that student has, rather than just saying, we're all going to learn by looking at a book and with a pencil and paper, right? That's actually not helpful, and that's not seen or sitting on the same level as your students.
Right. Let's say you went to Hebrew school, you felt a little bit put down a lot, and you learned in front of the class a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be surprised if that child is never going to go back.
100% agreed.
Go back to synagogue ever again. Don't be surprised if that's the association they have with.
That's right. That's right. Teachers make a big difference on whether or not you continue to learn or not. That's right. Okay, so then the Rambam continues. I don't remember why I put one in a box and one not in a box, but okay, he continues on here and says, "Kol tamid chacham mitzvah lehadro ve'af al pi she'eno rabo." So it's actually a commandment. It's a mitzvah. It's this wonderful thing that we have responsibility to do, to praise any disciple of our sages, even if they are not your master. As it says, Mipnei seva takum vehadrata pnei zaken. Zaken ze shekana chochma. So this is a verse from Vayikra, from Leviticus, that says, honor the face of a zaken, of someone who is older. But that's not like the adage in English where we say, honor your elders. That's not actually necessarily what they're referring to. What they're referring to is a person who is zaken. That means that they have wisdom, that they actually have knowledge that you don't have because they are older than you. However, what that doesn't mean is that someone who is younger than you cannot be your teacher, right? I am younger than 98% of the people in this space, right? That I hope that doesn't mean that I don't look to you all as my teachers, but that in turn that I can't be your teacher because I'm younger, right? And that also makes for good education, is the fact that a zaken doesn't necessarily need to be an elder, but rather just someone who has proficiency. Right? I will never have, no matter how old I get, I will never have proficiency in mathematics. So if I have a child who does have a proficiency in mathematics at some point in their lifetime, they will be the zaken, even though I will always be older than them. Right? And that's what this is referring to, that we should read that Leviticus quote as not an older person, but rather a proficient or wiser person. Which, by the way, just because you're older doesn't mean you're wiser, and that's not what this is saying here. But we should assume more knowledge with more years. Okay, in Pirkei Avot, Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua says, let the honor of your student be as dear to you as your own, and the honor of your fellow like the reverence of your teacher, and the reverence of your teacher like the reverence of heaven. So I said I'm not very good at math, but I do understand math enough to know that this is the transitive property, right? That you should recognize that if you are going to be honored by your student and vice versa, that then you can revere, you can respect someone who is just a fellow, like someone who could be your teacher, and that you should revere your teachers, therefore, like you have reverence for God. Does anybody have any thoughts on this? Do you want to push back on this at all?
Unfortunately, I had a lot of bad teachers who didn't really teach.
I hear that.
I had teachers who didn't really teach.
Okay. So does anybody have any thoughts on this particular text? Anyone want to push back on this idea of honoring your student, and therefore, if you honor your teacher, it's going to be like the reverence that you have for God?
I don't really want to push. Sorry.
No, that's okay. You can go ahead, Ian. Go ahead.
I mean, I think that it's something I've, as an education major,
Oh, great.
like,
Yeah.
it's something that's, like, all of this is so heavily influenced in our classes, like,
Sure.
differentiation.
Yes.
You know, you're basically an actor on stage is what they're telling you as a teacher. And, you know, when it comes to this, it's one thing that all of my teachers, all of my professors told me is every single person, everyone that you meet in your entire life is a teacher.
Right.
Treat them like that.
Great.
And, you know, like it says here in Pirkei Avot, you're supposed to treat them like the reverence of heaven, and just like we should with any person,
Sure.
no matter what, because we're all, you know, B'Tselem Elohim, made in the image of God.
Yeah.
Like, every single person has that bit of holiness that we deserve to, like, show them that respect. They deserve that respect. Whether we feel like they're teaching us or not, we're learning all
Great.
the time.
Great. So we are making reference back to this idea of being made in the image of God, that if we should respect and revere and approach human beings as if they are a piece of God, so too we should be able to approach and respect and see teacher ability or learning capacity from each person that we encounter, because everyone, as you just said, can also be a teacher. Rabbi Berenbaum, was that a hand? Michael, was that a hand? Yeah.
Part of and this goes back to what I learned from Jordan, who wrote his doctorate on the question of going down or coming forth. Why do you have to respect the quotation of your rabbi,
Yeah.
your teacher,
Yeah.
Morat Shemaim? Because he's the one who, or she's the one who's the vehicle to reaching heaven.
Mm.
And the other part of this is Kol Tamid Chacham Mitzvah Lahadro. In other words, you essentially, why do you revere someone who's a Talmid Chacham?
Mm-hmm.
Because he's the embodiment of that wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And respecting that wisdom means you have to respect the embodiment of it.
Mm-hmm.
But the
Mm-hmm.
idea of Morat Shemayim, you have awe because he or she is your vehicle.
Beautiful.
Coming up.
And I think that gets back to something that Rosa said, and then we'll turn the page so people can turn it over if they like. This idea that if that person is a vehicle to your connection to God, whether it's a spiritual subject or not, they could also be the detriment, right? And so taking that teaching, taking that exposure, taking that relationship very seriously, both as teacher and student, of recognizing the ways in which, whether it's a connection to God literally through the spiritual access to God, or through God in the way in which you are viewing other people or a subject matter, right? That can be, a teacher can make or break that very, very, very easily. So I love Gordon as in Bernat Cunin, or Tucker? Oh, Gordon Bernat Cunin. Wow, I didn't know that was his topic. Okay. We're going to look at two more sources here. We're going to look at the Mishnah Torah, the first one here, and then we're going to look at Rabbi Jonathan Sachs to round this all out. This is one that you probably have heard of, but not necessarily from the Mishnah Torah, but rather from the actual Torah, from Devarim, when we talk about Arei Miklat, when we talk about the cities of refuge. If a student was banished to a city of refuge, the teacher must be exiled too. It's a really profound statement that if you as a student were told to, sorry, yeah, if you as a student were told that you had to leave based off of an action that you did, your teacher, because they are your student, has to go with you. Rabbi Klickfeld and I, during the pandemic, taught on this text. And one of the things that he said that I never thought of before is that that also shows that you as a teacher are choosing your students, right? That by being in a space of education, whether that's the school you're choosing or that's the environment that you're teaching in, you, by way of making those choices, are also making a choice to choose the students who might be in your classroom. And when I say classroom, I don't mean four walls with desks and chairs. Any space that you are teaching in. By working at Temple Beth Am, I choose my students. Right? You are my students by coming into my classroom. I'm not handpicking students, but if any of you were to be sent to these Arei Miklat, I'm supposed to go with you because your teacher is supposed to be there to teach you at all times. As it's written in Devarim, and he shall live, right? That Devarim is basically saying, by saying that vechai is that you need to be that life to that person, right? You need to be the one who can provide the education, can provide that sustenance and that life, even if they are no longer in the community. That is, make it possible for him to live. Life without study is like death for scholars who seek wisdom. So too, if a teacher went into exile, the school must be exiled. So this also goes both ways. Right? And we've seen this before in modern day in terms of when someone leaves a community for whatever reason, right? It might be because their behavior was not okay. It might be because the community decided that this was no longer the right fit. You see people leave with that person, right? That is very common. And it's not a, expletives are the only thing coming to mind right now, so I'm not going to say them. But it's not a way of saying you go do you, and we're going to follow someone who we felt more connected to, but rather this idea that when you find a teacher, you want to follow them. When my teacher, Rabbi Aaron Alexander, moved to DC, there was a very faint idea in my mind that I was only going to look for pulpits in DC, because I wanted to be near him. And I remember that I live in the 21st century and there are phones and internet and all these things, and he can feel as close to me in DC as I could feel to him if we were in the same city. But there is something very powerful about this, that if any of you were in trouble, I would feel responsible to go with you, and vice versa. If I left, there might be people for whom they say, we have to make sure that she has students, right? And that's a very powerful relationship that we don't often think about, right? Teachers don't leave with their students when they leave high school, right? And when you become a rabbi, your teachers don't flee the institution, right? They continue to teach other students, but you hopefully then take them with you in other ways. Okay, the last text we're going to look at, and then I'm happy to take a few comments before we do Birkat Hamazon. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, a fabulous teacher to many, whether you knew him intimately or just via emails that you would receive and still receive, even after his passing. I believe that Judaism made an extraordinarily wise decision when it made teachers its heroes and lifelong education its passion. Think about Judaism for a second. We know that we are supposed to pray. We know that we are supposed to have a spiritual existence. But all of that also comes back to a life of learning. There is nothing that we do in Judaism that doesn't also surround some aspect of educational connection. Just to be able to say tefillot, right? You have to have had some kind of exposure. That doesn't mean knowing how to read the Siddur, but you have had to have had some kind of exposure to learning those tefillot to be able to be in a space where you can daven them and experience and feel them. We don't worship power or wealth. These things have their place, but not at the top of the hierarchy of values. Power forces us, wealth induces us. but teachers develop us. They open us to the wisdom of the ages, helping us to see the world more clearly, think more deeply, argue more cogently, and decide more wisely. Right? This idea that people in our lives, and these could be your parents, right? It doesn't have to be a person in front of the classroom, that there are people in our lives who push us to learn things, to see the world in wondrous ways that we would never know because of the experience that they share with us of their lives and of that which is important to them. And I'll just put this out there because I know that this is real for everyone, and it is part of what made me decide that I want to be a teacher. I've also had really bad teachers. And there are ways in which having bad teachers makes you want to be better, makes you want to recognize the way in which you felt in a classroom because of that teacher, and then do better as a teacher for other students. Rabbi Berenbaum is not in that it's not in that category. And there are also people in our lives whose teachings, it is very hard for me to call Rabbi Dorf Elliot, because he will always be a rabbi in anything he does. And so when he writes me and he says, really, you should just call me Elliot, I say, I can't. It's not because you don't deserve to be called by your first name if that's what you wish, but I will always see you first and foremost as rabbi in the life that you've given to me and the teaching that you've done. And very similarly with Dr. Berenbaum, that I first and foremost experienced him as teacher before I was exposed to him on a relational basis where I could call him Michael. So I hope for all of us that we have teachers in our lives like Elliot and Michael, there I did it, who can be for us teachers but can also be for us friends, and who can expose us to the ways in which we also should be teachers to our communities, and the way that teaching is not just sitting in a classroom at the front of the room, but is also just walking in life with people who can expose you to the wonders of the world that we never thought possible. Shavuot.